This week's Grimm Fairy Tales: Gossip Wolf and the Fox. The she-wolf brought forth a young one and invited the fox to be godfather.
"After all, he is a near relative of ours,"
said she.
"He has a good understanding and much talent. He can instruct my little son and help him forward in the world."
The fox too appeared quite honest and said, "Worthy Miss Gossip, I thank you for the honor which you are doing me. I will, however, conduct myself in such a way that you shall be repaid for it." He enjoyed himself at the feast and made merry. Afterwards he said, "Dear Mrs. Gossip, it is our duty to take care of the child. It must have good food, that it may be strong. I know a sheepfold from which we might fetch a nice morsel." The wolf was pleased with the ditty, and she went out with the fox to the farmyard. He pointed out the fold from afar and said, "You will be able to creep in there without being seen, and in the meantime, I will look about on the other side to see if I can pick up a chicken." He, however, did not go there, but sat down at the entrance to the forest, stretched his legs and rested. The she-wolf crept into the stable. A dog was lying there, and it made such a noise that the peasants came running out, caught Gossip Wolf, and poured a strong burning mixture, which had been prepared for washing, over her skin. At last she escaped and dragged herself outside. There lay the fox, who pretended to be full of complaints and said, "Ah, dear Mistress Gossip, how ill I have fared. The peasants have fallen on me and have broken every limb I have. If you do not want me to lie where I am and perish, you must carry me away." The she-wolf herself was only able to go away slowly, but she was in such concern about the fox that she took him on her back and slowly carried him perfectly safe and sound to her house. Then the fox cried to her, "Farewell, dear Mistress Gossip. May the roasting you have had do you good," laughed heartily at her, and bounded off. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, so she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say, 'Good morning,' and don't peep into every corner before you do it." "I will take great care," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand on it. The grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said he. "Thank you kindly, wolf." "Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live?" Little Red Riding Hood?"
"A good quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under the 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. You surely must know it,"
replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature. What a nice, plump mouthful. She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood. Then he said, "See, Little Red Riding Hood, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look round? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there, through the trees and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought,
"Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time."
And so she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers, and whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the wood. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to grandmother's house and knocked at the door.
"Who is there?"
"Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf. "She is bringing cake and wine. Open the door."
"Lift the latch,"
called out the grandmother.
"I am too weak and cannot get up."
The wolf lifted the latch. The door flew open, and without saying a word, he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in bed and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother and set out on the way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself,
"Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today. And at other times I like being with grandmother so much."
She called out,
"Good morning,"
but received no answer. So she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled far over her face and looking very strange.
"Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have."
"The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply.
"But grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said.
"The better to see you with, my dear."
"But grandmother, what large hands you have."
"The better to hug you with."
"Oh, but grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have."
"The better to eat you with." And scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in the bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring. I must just see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it, "Do I find thee here, thou old sinner?" said he. "I have long sought thee." Then just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the little Red Riding Hood shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out crying,
"Oh, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf!"
And after that, the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Red Riding Hood, however, quickly fetched great stones with which they filled the wolf's body, and when he awoke, he wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he fell down at once and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Red Riding Hood had brought, and revived, but Red Riding Hood thought to herself,
"As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so."
It is also related that once when Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf spoke to her and tried to entice her from the path. Red Riding Hood, however, was on her guard and went straight forward on her way, and told her grandmother that she had met the wolf, and that he said, "Good morning," to her, but with such a wicked look in his eyes that if they had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up.
"Well," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, that he may not come in."
Soon afterwards, the wolf knocked and cried,
"Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Red Riding Hood, and am fetching you some cakes."
But they did not speak or open the door, so the gray beard stole twice or thrice round the house, and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Red Riding Hood went home in the evening, and then to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough, so she said to the child, "Take the pail, Red Riding Hood. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough." Red Riding Hood carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of the sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far that he could no longer keep his footing and began to slip, and slipped down from the roof straight into the great trough, and was drowned. But Red Riding Hood went joyously home, and never did anything to harm anyone. The Wedding of Mrs. Fox. Part 1. There was once on a time an old fox with 9 tails, who believed that his wife was not faithful to him, and wished to try her. He stretched himself out under the bench, and did not move a limb, and behaved as if he were stone dead. Mrs. Fox went up to her room, shut herself in, and her maid, Miss Cat, sat by the fire and did the cooking. When it became known that the old fox was dead, wooers presented themselves. The maid heard someone standing at the house door, knocking. She went and opened it, and it was a young fox who said, "What may you be about, Miss Cat? Do you sleep or do you wake?" She answered, "I am not sleeping, I am waking. Wouldst thou know what I am making? I am boiling warm beer with butter so nice.
Will the gentleman enter and drink some likewise?"
"No, thank you, miss," said the fox.
"What is Miss Fox doing?"
The maid replied,
"She sits all alone and makes her moan, weeping her little eyes quite red, because old Mr. Fox is dead."
"Do just tell her, miss, that a young fox is here who would like to woo her."
"Certainly, young sir." The cat goes up the stairs, trip, trap. The door she knocks at, tap, tap, tap. "Mistress Fox, are you inside?" "Oh, yes, my little cat," she cried. "A wooer, he stands at the door out there. Tell me what he is like, my dear. But has he 9 as beautiful tails as the late Mr. Fox?" "Oh, no," answered the cat. "He has only 1. "Then I will not have him."
Miss Cat went downstairs and sent the wooer away. Soon afterwards, there was another knock, and another fox was at the door who wished to woo Mrs. Fox. He had 2 tails, but he did not fare better than the first. After this, still more came, each with 1 tail more than the other, but they were all turned away, until at last one came who had 9 tails, like old Mr. Fox. When the widow heard that, she said joyfully to the cat, "Now open the gates and doors all wide, and carry old Mr. Fox outside." But just as the wedding was going to be solemnized, old Mr. Fox stirred under the bench and cudgeled all the rabble, and drove them and Mrs. Fox out of the house. Part 2. When old Mr. Fox was dead, the wolf came as a wooer and knocked at the door, and the cat, who was servant to Mrs. Fox, opened it for him. The wolf greeted her and said, "Good day, Mrs. Cat of Curlwit. How comes it that alone you sit? What are you making good?" The cat replied, "In milk I'm breaking bread so sweet. Will the gentleman please come in and eat?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Cat," answered the wolf. "Is Mrs. Fox not at home?" The cat said, "She sits upstairs in her room, bewailing her sorrowful doom, bewailing her trouble so sore, for old Mr. Fox is no more." The wolf answered, "If she's in want of a husband now, then will it please her to step below?" The cat runs quickly up the stair and lets her tail fly here and there until she comes to the parlor door. With her 5 gold rings at the door she knocks. "Are you within, good Mistress Fox? If you're in want of a husband now, then will it please you to step below?" Mrs. Fox asked, "Has the gentleman red stockings on, and has he a pointed mouth?" "No," answered the cat. "Then he won't do for me." When the wolf was gone, came a dog, a stag, a hare, a bear, a lion, and all the beasts of the forest, one after the other. But one of the good points which old Mr. Fox had possessed was always lacking, and the cat had continually to send the wooers away. At length came a young fox. Then Mrs. Fox said, "Has the gentleman red stockings on, and has he a little pointed mouth?" "Yes," said the cat, "he has." "Then let him come upstairs," said Mrs. Fox, and ordered the servant to prepare the wedding feast. "Sweep me the room as clean as you can. Up with the window, fling out my old man. For many a fine fat mouse he brought, yet of his wife he never thought, but ate up every one he caught." Then the wedding was solemnized with young Mr. Fox, and there was much rejoicing and dancing, and if they have not left off, they are dancing still. The Fox and the Geese. The fox once came to a meadow in which was a flock of fine, fat geese, on which he smiled and said, "I come in the nick of time. You are sitting together quite beautifully, so that I can eat you up one after the other." The geese cackled with terror, sprang up and began to wail and beg piteously for their lives. But the fox would listen to nothing and said, "There is no mercy to be had. You must die." At length, one of them took heart and said,
"If we poor geese are to yield up our vigorous young lives, show us the only possible favor and allow us one more prayer, that we may not die in our sins, and then we will place ourselves in a row, so that you can always pick yourself out the fattest."
"Yes," said the fox, "that is reasonable, and a pious request. Pray away. I will wait till you are done." Then the first began a good long prayer for every saying,
"Ga, ga."
And as she would make no end, the second did not wait until her turn came, but began also,
"Ga, ga."
The third and fourth followed her, and soon they were all cackling together. When they have done praying, the story shall be continued further. But at present, they are still praying without stopping.